Welcome to another episode of Geekoutdoors.com. And on this upcoming very special episode, I'm actually doing something a little bit different. I'm creating a how-to series. And in this series, the whole goal of mine is to help people use technology in a way that actually can improve their lives and actually improves the lives of others. And so I'm a strong believer that technology with the right tools, it could actually add value to your lives. So hopefully you enjoy this series that I produce and that you definitely do get some great value out of this. And so enjoy the upcoming episode, and we'll see you on the very next episode. Welcome to another episode of Geekoutdoors.com. And on this video, I'm actually been doing something a little bit different. I'm creating a series of how-to tutorials on tools that I use, which I believe will not only make things a little bit easier in your life, but also add a little bit of value as well. And so the very first series that I'm going to start off with is why I do not use Windows or Mac in 2015. Now, I will say up front that these series of videos, they're more geared towards people who are non-techie or newbies. And so if you're the type of person who is an extreme geek, nerd, or just a tech fanatic, I will leave some links to channels that I think will be better suited for people who are actually really tech-centric. So let's go ahead and first start off with why I don't use either one of these operating systems. Now, whenever you're buying a new computer, whether it be a desktop or a laptop, it's either going to have Windows on it or it's going to have Mac. So those are pretty much the two choices that most people are familiar with. And especially with Windows, it is the dominant operating system out there. So I have 3 C's on why I don't use either one of these. And the 3 C's, they're not related to diamonds, but they are my 3 C's, which are cost, choice, and control. Now let's first start off with costs. Now, it wasn't too long ago that if you wanted a new version of Windows or of Mac, you could actually go out there and buy a physical copy, whether it be on DVD, CD, and you could also download it more recently, a new version of it, but you would usually have to pay for that new version. Now, here recently, they're both Windows and Mac, they're actually allowing you to upgrade to the newest version, of course, if your hardware is suited for it, for free. Now, there are still options to where you could purchase these operating systems separately, but most people are now just upgrading. So, whenever you are buying a brand new computer, the cost of your operating system is already built into the price of the hardware that you are buying. And so, it's not really free as they would like you to believe. So that's the first cost, is actually the monetary cost of the operating system. The second cost is what most people are probably don't think about, is the actual ecosystem that you are buying into. Because once you buy this actual software, now you're actually in their world or their domain. A good example of this is Microsoft Office. Now, whenever you buy Microsoft Office, it usually will work best on a Windows machine, but it's available on multiple platforms. But the thing is, once you start using Microsoft Office or using Windows, you are very heavily invested into it and you are used to using their software. And so you are already going into their ecosystem right there. So there's not a lot of great alternatives outside of Office once you actually use it on a regular basis. So that's one thing. And then for Apple, their App Store is the most profitable one out there, and also their iTunes Store. And so once you get into the Apple ecosystem, you've already invested a lot of your money and time into that ecosystem. And also with Apple's products, most of their software works predominantly on their hardware. Now, there are some cases where their software is available on other platforms like iTunes, but it works best with their hardware and it's not always available on other operating systems. A good case in point here, which most people think about, is Safari. And I know that might not seem like something huge, but that browser is not available on any other operating systems besides Apple. And so that's just one example is of the cost that's going to be associated whenever you buy either one of these operating systems. The second C is actually choice. Now, whenever you are buying either Windows or Mac, your choices of the versions of Windows or Mac, it's very limited. You're pretty much going to buy just one version. Is Windows 10, or in this case, OS X 10, which is El Capitan. Now, there are basic, home, and also commercial versions of each one of these. Specifically with Windows, they do have a commercial version available. However, they're pretty much the same versions. There's with additions out there, and so you don't have too many choices when it comes to their operating systems, and they pretty much look all the same. No matter which version of Windows that you're buying, as long as it is the newest version or with El Capitan. They have a very similar look, both on the outside and underneath. Now, that leads me to the last thing, which is control. As I just mentioned, whether you're buying an Apple or a Windows machine, if you have the latest version of that operating system, no matter which computer you buy, it's pretty much going to look the same. Now, there are things that you can do, specifically with Windows, that can change the look and feel of the operating system on top. Like, you could get different themes where you could change the icons. Obviously, you could change the wallpapers and so forth. But it's pretty much going to function the same. And underneath it, it's definitely going to function the same because unless you have a lot of programming skills, and even if you did, you can't really change the underlying operating system and how it operates, whether it be Windows or on Mac. And so there is a lot of control exerted there. And also another level of control that most people don't think about is whenever you buy your hardware, you're pretty much almost stuck with that particular software, that operating system on that machine. Now, if you actually have some tech skills, you can alter this. Like, for example, if you were to buy a Windows machine and you wanted to put an Apple operating system on top of it, it is pretty hard unless you have some tech skills. And they have these Windows machines, they call them Hackintoshes, where you'll hack into the system, kinda, to put an Apple operating system on top of it. Now, on Apple's machines, once again, they have a lot of control over it, and so if you wanted to put Windows operating system on top of it, it is not very easy to do. You can install a piece of software called Boot Camp that will allow you to boot both an Apple operating system and Windows operating system, but once again, you're going to have some tech skills to do that, especially if you want to completely replace the whole operating system with Windows. And so they exert a lot of control there, so you're not able to do as you would think you want to do whenever you quote unquote own the machine. Your choices are pretty limited, and so is your control. And those are the really quick recap of the 3 C's of why I do not use Windows or Mac. And so if I don't use either one of these two, what is another option that I have if the 2 biggest and the 2 most popular are not used? Well, the choice that I choose is Linux. And Linux actually is an open source operating system, and what that means is the programming language or how it is built is actually publicly available to everyone on the internet. So you could actually see how it's built, and if you have the technical skills, you could actually change it. And I'll talk about that a little bit further. So why is Linux my preferred operating system? Well, quite simply, it fulfills every one of the 3 C's that I just mentioned a little bit earlier. So the first C that it fulfills is cost. As I mentioned, Linux is an open source operating system. And this isn't always the case, but most open source operating systems or open source projects, they're actually all community driven and they are free. And so 99% of Linux versions are all free. There are some that are not free, such as Red Hat, which is a commercial version of Linux, which means that there is paid support for this. So this is not free. However, most nearly every other version of Linux is free, which leads me to choice. So when it comes to choice, unlike Windows or Mac, you don't have like one or two versions of it. You have hundreds of different versions, or in this case they call them distributions, available. And so you really pick and choose the ones that you like. For example, my preferred version of Linux is Linux Mint. This is basically my Windows replacement. This allows me to do pretty much everything that I used to do in Windows. Another version of Linux is Ubuntu, which is the most popular version of Linux available. And when I say most popular, I mean like for daily use. The most popular on server-based Linux operating system is Red Hat. And then with Linux, you could go as general and just user-friendly, such as Linux Mint and Ubuntu, or you could go as really tech-heavy as you'd like, such as Arch Linux, which is definitely not for beginners. So your choices are quite many, and also your choices on how it looks as well. Linux Mint looks different than, say, Ubuntu, like right here, or there is a version that is called KDE, which actually changes the whole look of your operating system. So this one's pretty much the Apple pretty version of Linux. And so depending on what you like, you have a lot of choices on how you want your operating system to look and also to function. Which leads me to the last C that Linux fulfills, which is control. And with Linux, if you have, I guess, the time and the skills, you could change everything on the operating system, from the way it looks to the way it functions. And even if you have some really good programming skills, you could even go into the operating system itself and change pretty much every part of it, all the way down to the kernel, which is basically the brains of the whole operating system. And so those things is not freely available on either Windows or Mac. And with Linux, you are not tied down to an ecosystem like you would be on either Windows, and especially on an Apple platform. And so those three C's are completely fulfilled by Linux. And also some other benefits of using Linux is that in general, the security in Linux is much better than it is on Windows, and also very comparable or better than it is on the Apple operating system as well. So that's one thing. And also, when it comes down to it, Linux, specifically Linux Mint, it just lets me use my computer, for like basic things, like surfing the internet, doing office applications, doing photo editing, video editing, programming, and so forth, without getting tons of system updates like we do in Windows, and ads and pop-ups and so forth, and also not with like such tight control such as you do with an Apple machine or a Mac OS operating system. And so that's it for this very first episode, or this very first tutorial series that I have on why I don't use Windows or Mac in 2015. On the very next video series, I'm going to be talking about how you can start making the move to Linux, specifically for Windows users, and I'll also cover a little bit of basics on how you could do this on if you are a Mac user as well. And then on the final series of this 3-part series, I'm going to be talking about how you can actually use Linux Mint on a day-to-day basis as you would on either Windows machine or Mac. It's just like everybody else. How do you actually use these tools, and how do you use it in a way that will actually benefit you? And so that's going to be pretty much a 3-part series, and if people find a lot of value in this, I might make even more detailed videos on how to use specific software and how also to utilize different tools within Linux Mint. So that's it for this very first tutorial series. If you like these videos, be sure to subscribe. And for the whole full written episodes, blogs, and videos, be sure to head out to geekoutdoors.com, and I will see you on the very next episode.